right, in this video, we're going to look at getting catalogs or price lists into your Buildxact supplier system. We are going to look at a couple of tips and tricks. We're going to look at the scope and status and what that does and how it affects your lists that you load and how the sharing works in regards to that. We're also going to have a look at, towards the end of the video, how to update that pricing and what implications that has with your Buildxact customer who is connected. So what does that mean for their pricing and their estimates? What does that mean for actions they might have to take, etc.? Beautiful. So we're going to start by going catalogs, create new, and just give a quick distinction between the difference of item catalog versus recipe catalog. Item catalog is 99.9% of the time what people are going to load. It is a standard price list. One line in the list equals one cost. It's absolutely the go-to if you're in doubt. Recipe catalogs, on the other hand, are the exception. And a recipe for us is a group of standard priced items. An example here would be a door, which will have a door, a jamb, architrave, a handle, hinges, etc. as a bundle. So a recipe is a bundle of items or a composite of priced items, and you can definitely import them, but for the majority of people, they'll be importing catalogs. Sorry, item catalogs specifically. Now I'm going to name this new list I'm bringing in. I'm going to call it November list. And the tips here are the name and the description are both visible to the person you're sharing it to. As a result, I would highly recommend against putting things like tier 1, tier 3 in this, unless you are comfortable sharing that with your customers. We definitely do have people who subtly add this kind of thing in for distinction. So they put bracket 1, bracket 2, bracket 3, and someone on the other end won't necessarily know what that means. So if you need to, you can reference it this way, but really the main takeaway is just be very cognizant that this name and description both visible to the end user. Difference between name and description: this is the main identifier of the list. Description is more about the contents. So you might have a November list for timber and hardware, and another one for paint and decorating, another one for landscaping, and you can have several lists with varying descriptions. Contact will always be you. You're issuing the list, and this tick box just says that you want to import it from Excel. We'll go Start Import. And upload data. And before I get too far into actually loading this list, a quick mention that we have another video specifically on getting the formatting right before you get to this point. And I'm just going to take a really brief segue to illustrate two things. One is that the other video that I'm referring to, and also any help articles to do with loading catalogs, will all reference the same template. Simply put, we need our price list in a rather defined structure for it to load successfully. This is a template on that structure, and when I'm explaining this to people, I'll typically say, hey, look, we need a minimum of 3 things, those, and a good number of columns or pieces of information are either 5 with the supplier code and category, or 6 with a subcategory, 7 even with the type of item. For your first attempt at this, I would probably recommend against bothering with the optional columns, things like minimum quantities, manufacturer's range, etc. But the other video goes much more into length at this. And also for context, this is the list I'm loading. I did a data export for this one. It was very close to the right format to begin with, and that just raises another point I want to cover. When you are getting these lists, the more they can be just a straight database style export, the better, because Buildxact needs raw data that is just columns and rows. We don't need formatting, we don't need images. In fact, that stuff is all more work for you to have to remove. So I'm going to load that exact list I was just looking at. It's going to process and have a think about it. Depending on the size of the file, this can take a moment. And what it's going to do is load the sheets and then ask me which of the sheets I want to use. So what this means is in an Excel workbook, you might have multiple pages and it just wants to know which page to look at. In my case, I've only got one, so I literally just leave it as is and go continue. It then asks more questions. Hey, this top row, which for me contained the basically descriptors of the columns. So that was the name, that was the code column, that was the unit of measure column. It wants to know, are they the headings? And yes, they are. It then takes a step forward and says, great. So the name column, that equals a description column in Buildxact. It wants you to basically play the matching game. So the way I'm reading this is saying, name was the Excel columns heading. Examples were passage head Amelia lever, so they're handles. And in Buildxact, we call them descriptions. And this is another great reason to reference this template because it has more detail about what each thing is, also examples, and this will help clarify. Code, we call that supplier code. That's perfect. Unit of measure, we call that unit of measure. Price X, we call that unit cost, which is there. Group, we call that category. And while I'm in this particular dropdown, I mentioned or referencing the template, how we had a lot of different columns. This dropdown has a lot of different things. It is very uncommon that you'll be using anything below the top, say 6 or 7, in my opinion. Group is category, subgroup is subcategory. Customer reference I put here solely so I can show you to ignore things if you need. Ignore. And review. Any problems in this will be red. So for example, I can make a problem by putting a letter in that. It's going to not be really happy. Other problems it'll highlight are duplicate item codes, cells that are too long. And a great way to highlight this is use this little filter. Just show me all the problems. And in my case, there are none. If that's all good, I can proceed. Load it in. And it's going to crunch away in the background. So it's this list here, November list 1. Notice the default state or scope for this is public and draft, meaning it's not actively being shared to anyone. So let's dig into what these statuses and scopes mean. Now, I've just opened the list and it takes me straight to the details page, which is where I control the scope, the status. I can add notes, which are internal to me. But most important is scope and status. So scope is who is this list visible to? Public means everybody. Managed means it'll add an extra column and we delve into the world of access control. So managed is basically only people who I say can see it. And there's a few ways I can handle this, either by bulk importing a list of either customer numbers or customer emails who are allowed to see it, or I can go through the clients menu and do it one by one. And we'll talk more about this in the video about how to actually share the prices. But managed is basically, it's got a limited view. It's really good if you're going to do tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and you can then control who is in each of those tiers. Hidden means it's literally never going to leave this account. It's actually just an internal list for you guys. So I'm going to say this is public. Most of the time that'll be RRP lists. I'm going to say it is published, which is the status. So any list, whether it be public, managed, etc., will also have a status, whether it's either draft, i.e. not live, published, live, expired, it's done its time, and it's no longer live. Archived is basically deleted. We just store it for reference, and by the time it gets to this, we definitely get some users who just delete the list. So if it says published, it means that it is actively available to people to view and subscribe to. Now, before we move on to how to update pricing, I just want to show you the list that we've actually loaded, which is this one here, and hopefully it finishes in just a moment. In fact, just while it's still loading, I might give it a bit more time. I've loaded this one in the past. This is what it looks like. So the end result of loading this list is that we will have it broken into categories, subcategories, and the reason this is relevant is when your builder or customer end user in Buildxact is searching for things, they go through the similar format. So they are able to search by category, by description, by item code if there is one there, and the more organized you can make a list, the better the experience for that end user. Beautiful. Now let's return to how to update pricing. Now this is a section that different people will navigate in different ways, but there is really, when you boil it down, there's two ways of tackling it. So what we're doing, well, the question we're trying to answer is, hey, this was a November list. It's now January and I want to update it. How do I go about it? And the two options are, one, you basically update the existing list. So this list stays put and you just update content and names, etc. in it. Option two is you, as we looked at with the scope and status, you basically retire this list and you add a new one. A point on, if you go with option two of retiring the list, the effective date and expiry date become really useful here because you can automatically set a list to expire or automatically set a list to come online at a certain point. These dates basically move a list from draft to published or published to expired at the designated date. So what is the difference in the two options? Well, option one involves getting a list and updating it without changing the name, without changing too much else about it. This is good if you don't have that many lists to deal with, and also particularly good if you aren't updating catalogs let's say every month. The reason this is better in that scenario is if you had, let's say, 20 catalogs to update every month, then making them expire and adding new ones is probably an easier way for you to do this. But let's have a look at option one, which is updating the list. And you can do this in a number of ways. The absolute quickest, nastiest way to do this is with the little blue clock button, which will open up and you can literally increase, decrease, multiply all rates by 1%. That does have a place, but it's not used all that often. More commonly, people will use the up arrow button, which is to import a catalog like they did the first time. The only difference here is there's existing content in the list. And when you load it, it will match the item code, first of all, if present. It'll match the item code that we have on that existing list against the new list. It'll also match the description of the item against the incoming one if there is no item code. So it's basically trying to figure out the existing item versus the new item, which ones match with which ones. And it's going to take the newer price and override the price that you're holding for it. If there is no matching item, it'll make a new one and it'll basically think to itself, well, this is a new item. We'll add that as a new thing. The scenario that this does not handle well is deletions, because bulk importing, there's no way for us to tell the system that, hey, that item no longer exists. So if you do go with option one, it does mean that items that are basically no longer available do need to be removed manually. pros and cons of option 1. It is, for the end user, probably simpler. They will get alerts when they are estimating, little pop-ups that say, hey, this price has changed, and they just approve that, and they go, yep, accept the new price. So for the end user, it's arguably simpler. The con is if you have lots and lots of lists, it's more work to go through them and update them. Also, you are live updating them. So the timing at which you do that is more relevant, i.e. you can't just say, load this new change and make it take effect at X date. The change will take effect as soon as you load that new list. Option 2, which we went through before, but I'll just go through what option 2 is again in case you've forgotten it. Option 2 is that you would basically expire an old list and add a new one. And you can use the effective dates and expiry dates to really help with this. When you're using this method, it literally is that one list dies and you add a new list and it comes online. The pros and cons of this method are it's better if you're managing a lot of lists because you can make them go online and offline at certain times. The con is for the end user, they have to subscribe to these lists. So what I'm going to do is very quickly just connect to a user and just show you this, what exactly I'm talking about. So although I'm stealing a little bit of thunder from another video, I'm just going to connect to a builder right now. Approve. Great. So this is the builder's account that I've connected to. Once the connection is approved, they have to choose to subscribe or not subscribe to certain lists. If I push a new list in their direction, they have to subscribe to that. So it's really worth being cognizant of that. And most people who go with option 2 will also have additional communication to their users going, hey, we've pushed a new list out. Don't forget to subscribe to it so that you are able to take advantage of that new pricing. That user will get the same alert when they're estimating, or a similar alert when they're estimating, saying that that price is no longer current. The alert that they will get, however, is slightly different. It will say that the list has been deleted, and that user will have to do a slight bit of extra work in going through and updating the linked items to essentially tell Buildxact, hey, this old RRP list is the lowest preference one on my radar. I want to refresh all my items with this new RRP list or the new list that you've pushed out, which basically tells Buildxact to relink their estimate with the newest list available. We have videos on this for builders and our users on how it works, but there is additional work if you go with that kind of letting a list die, adding a new list method, which we've called option 2. Hopefully that adds clarity to several things, how to load lists, how they function, how the permissions work, and the different ways of then sharing them out and what that means for your end user. Any questions on this, do let us know. Thanks.